comes from the Arizona Inn, a four-diamond, family-owned historic resort hotel and restaurant on Elm Street near the U of A. Information is at arizonainn.com.
Hello everyone, I'm Tucson Weekly editor Jim Nitzel, and we're here to talk Zona Politics. Joining me today to talk about a whole bunch of current events are Leah Marquez-Peterson, the president and CEO of the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and attorney Jeff Rogers, the former chair of the Pima County Democratic Party. Thanks to both of you for joining me here on Zona Politics.
Glad to be here.
Jeff, let's start with healthcare reform. Obviously in the headlines, the efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act have collapsed in Washington once again. President Trump is still urging GOP lawmakers to pick up the battle once more. They seem reluctant to do so. They seem to want to move on. John McCain was the one who delivered the swing vote to kill the so-called skinny repeal, which has nothing to do with my column. What did you think of John McCain's vote?
I applauded John McCain's vote, and I also applauded his sentiment later that we need to go back to regular order. We need to have committee hearings. We need to hear from all of the players in this, from the healthcare industry, from doctors, from nurses, from patients groups, from insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies. Everybody needs to come to the table to solve the problems that we have. So I'm hopefully this will lead to something that is more bipartisan in nature, because I don't think that they're ever going to be able to find something that will get them 50 votes of the Republicans, because you've got maybe half a dozen moderates that are not going to be satisfied with anything that satisfies Rand Paul or Ted Cruz. And so they're never going to be able to pull together 50 votes to just destroy this act. So I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of people are suggesting they need to do these cost-sharing reductions that are pending right now that President Trump threatens to get rid of every day, which is destabilizing the market. So that's a quick fix that I think could get some bipartisan support. And these are things that people who are the very sickest or who would have the highest premiums under the old-fashioned insurance policies, this helps support the insurance companies and stabilize the markets. So I think that's where we need to go with it first, fix that for at least the time being so that the markets will stabilize, and then sit down at the table and basically, try to compromise. I mean, nobody's going to get everything they want in this, and I don't think we're ever going to see a full-blown repeal of the act right now. Now, there is also this moderate bipartisan thing that's out there that I hear that McSally is maybe joining in on. It's a little flawed in some ways. It changes it from employers have to offer insurance if they have 50 employees or more, or they pay a penalty. And this would change it to 500, which is kind of high. I mean, 50 might be kind of low, but 500 is awfully high. So you would think they'd need to work out something maybe lower to 50 to 100. Maybe 100 would be a good compromise. But there are other aspects of that are kind of compromises that maybe Democrats could join with Republicans to effectuate.
And I want to dig into that in a minute, but Leah, did you think John McCain, his complaints seem to be more about process and the way this thing was unfolding than really the substance of the legislation. But what did you think of his decision?
We also applauded Senator McCain and his stance here. He heard from quite a number of Arizonans. He heard from Governor Ducey about his position on the skinny repeal, I guess it was called. What we've done in the chamber, Jim, is pull together our members and get opinion. And it is very diverse, whether it's hospitals, medical clinics, physicians, small business owners. I mean, you gather folks around the table, and there's not all agreement on the direction this should go. We wrote a letter to Senator McCain and Senator Flake while they were in the middle of the debate, and asked them to separate the discussion on Medicaid and Medicare from private marketplace. Private marketplace is the place that a lot of the small business owners are operating in and individuals, and it's broken. It's not affordable. It's something that's not working for our business community. So we asked them to focus and reassess where the Affordable Care Act was going and to look in that direction. We also applauded Congresswoman McSally. She was leading the Republican effort in a bipartisan approach to the Affordable Care Act. We participated in her press conference where she announced those 5 different pillars and the difference for small businesses, whether they have 50 employees or fewer, moving to 500, repealing the medical device tax, a lot of the different answers that they had in that Affordable Care Act option. And I hope that continues. So we want to see an approach that's really solution-based. It seemed to just get caught up in the politics. It was going nowhere. So we really need something that's going to answer the question for so many individuals that mandated they need to get health insurance, and for the small business community that really just couldn't act. We were stuck. It was not affordable options.
And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about this, because you have supported some elements of the Affordable Care Act, the Medicaid expansion in Arizona, for example, but you have been opposed to some of the regulatory elements. And so what parts of the Obamacare do you think are working, and what parts do you think need fixing?
I think we've got some real best practices, especially in Arizona, around Medicaid. I mean, our system is one that is hopefully replicated throughout the country, and it's something I know that Governor Ducey felt strongly about. On the flip side, Medicare and Medicare Advantage seem to be working well, and obviously a lot of us hope there's expansion or there's a way or affordability around that. It's really for those individuals that are in that working class, those that are employing people and those that are employees themselves. That's the piece that's not working, and it needs to have the right return on investment for the insurance companies, needs to be balanced while also providing the quality of care. I mean, so we've got a lot of different components there. So I'm hoping that this bipartisan approach will really open the doors to some real solution-based answers for the Affordable Care Act.
So really the individual marketplace, the online marketplace, that is, we're seeing increased rates there.
Yeah.
And that's been a problem.
And that's going to be
folks.
the key. If this moves from a small business 50 employees or fewer to 500 employees, and that 500 number actually comes because that's the federal designation for a small business at the federal level. In Tucson, we know that's more like 25 employees or fewer probably, but because they're going to switch that and move it potentially with this bipartisan effort, you're going to have a complete focus on individual marketplace. So we need something that folks can turn to if they're not on Medicaid or Medicare that's palatable, that they can afford.
And Jeff, what do you think is working with the Affordable Care Act versus what's not working?
I think during the debates on the changes, what we saw is that it is fairly universally recognized that the Medicaid expansion is very popular. And that seems to be a big sticking point with a lot of the moderate Republicans and, of course, with all of the Democrats. And I think that that's where Governor Ducey weighed in with Senator McCain, was because we remember back to before this passed, you know, how we were losing rural hospitals, and the rate of uncompensated care that hospitals were having to eat was cutting into not only their profit margin, but their ability to survive. And wasn't just happening in Arizona, it's happening all across America. And so that's one of the things that is so significant and so important, is that these hospitals get compensated for the care they give and are able to financially survive. So I do think that 500 is a little high. I mean, when you look at a town like Tucson, you know, you're right, 25 to 50 or 100 people is about the outline of a small business. You get pretty large after that. So I think 500 is way too high. It will allow too many employers to then cut their insurance offerings, and that'll make the market less competitive, and it'll force more people onto the exchanges. And the exchanges, as Leah said, and I would agree, are the area where we need to most look at what can we do to make it competitive, get more insurance companies involved, and probably is going to have to be a lot more government subsidies in that area, and that's one of the features of the Democratic plans as well.
And Leah, what about these 10 essential benefits? How important do you think that is to keep in the legislation in the future?
I mean, there are key points that are very emotional for the country to handle, whether it's the pre-existing conditions, how will that be managed, the subsidies that are in place. I mean, I think each of that has been negotiated, I think, behind the scenes at this point in preparation for perhaps the Senate bill failing, as it has. So I think it's all a big negotiation. But the piece that can't be missed in this, and what we provide feedback to Congressman McSally and Grijalva and Senator Flake, Senator McCain, is that the small business voice should be heard. Arizona is more than 90% small businesses. So if it's not working for us, you've got the big employers perhaps that can work something out, but from a small business perspective, we can't afford what's currently being offered. So we need to take all those components into place.
And what do you make of the president's threats to get rid of the subsidies that help people afford insurance on the individual marketplace?
It's hard to know what that would do as one single point. We need to look at the big picture. If there are no subsidies, then how is it affordable? And he's also said that in various tweets. So I don't know what that means.
Jeff?
Well, there's two different things. One, there are the subsidies that help people afford the premiums. But there's these also things that they call CSRs, cost sharing reductions. And this is something that compensates the insurance company and allows them to then recompensate the providers of care and in cases where people are very sick and have very costly medical issues. And so that has to be fixed right away. I mean, that's the thing that the president keeps threatening to cut out from under us. And there seems to be a fairly bipartisan majority in Congress to go ahead and fix that pretty much right away before. And the other thing you've got to realize is that if you don't fix that now and fix it through 2018 or some definite period of time, you're not going to stabilize the market. More insurance companies are going to withdraw from the market because there's no predictability for them. And so they need to look out and plan a year or two in advance and say, okay, you've promised us this will be here. We can therefore set premiums and get back into marketplaces and counties that we had abandoned because of uncertainty.
And that's part of what Congresswoman McSally's bill said that we were talking about earlier, that you've been supportive of, Leah, is rescuing those cost-sharing reductions.
Right, or finding something that's balanced approach to providing health insurance to all of us.
And in general, the McSally legislation, you're
well, it's better. I certainly wouldn't want to see anything inserted that touched those 10 promised elements that we've got, because those are essential. What you'll see is a race to the bottom, and you'll get an affordable policy, but it'll be a meaningless policy. And so, we can't have that. People have to be able to count on things like the things that are so popular, keeping your children on your plan until they're 26 years old, pre-existing conditions, free annual medical examinations, and a host of other things that are really quite popular.
And let's shift gears a little bit over to Senator Jeff Flake. He has a new book out, Leah, The Conscience of a Conservative. It's kind of a callback to Senator Barry Goldwater's book. And Flake is very critical of President Trump and to some degree the Republican Party for enabling President Trump. And what do you make of this criticism?
It's interesting. I haven't yet read the book, but I've certainly seen all of the reviews, and he had an article in Politico and so on that I've been taking a look at. You can see where he's coming from. The party has, really been challenged with how they respond to a lot of President Trump's actions. You've seen that through the campaign as well as now in his administration. So I think there are a lot of Republicans that would probably stand behind Senator Flake and his opinions of where this administration has gone. Without having read the book and seeing all the different details, I know he certainly talks about the tone of the race and the discussion among kind of conservative values, and I think it'll be interesting to take a look at.
Jeff, your thoughts on what Senator Flake's doing here?
I like everything I've read about it, and I followed it very closely. And I can't agree with Jeff Flake on very many things at all, but I agree that there used to be a battle of ideas between Democrats and maybe liberals and conservative Republicans, and these ideas were important ideas, and the Republican Party tried to convince people these are the ideas we represent and you should adopt them for these various reasons. And somehow they have devolved into a party that is just in attack mode all of the time, lines up behind the politicians that they don't trust and don't agree with, like Donald Trump. And so I think he got the tone right. I wish he would vote a little differently, like, for instance, follow McCain's lead on this health care vote, but I think the tone is a real problem and the civility is a problem. And he addresses that quite a bit in this book and talks about, how we've become just such a nasty party, we the Republicans, for him. And I believe that, you can take a higher road, and as Barry Goldwater said, you don't have to be disagreeable to disagree.
It seems though Jeff Flake does have a very conservative voting record, but it doesn't seem to be enough for some conservatives I've spoken to who are disappointed and feel like he's too liberal, Leah. And what do you make of that?
I've heard that too. I mean, I think he's got a pretty contentious race coming up in his reelection. But from a perspective as a Hispanic chamber, his support of international trade and NAFTA and comprehensive immigration reform and small business and the economy, he's pretty aligned with us. That's something that we've stood behind. So the conservative piece of the party, I don't know. I don't understand that.
Jeff, your thoughts on how this affects him politically, running for re-election next year, a primary race, and then I'm sure a general.
There was a public policy poll that came out today that showed his support was less than 15% statewide. And he is getting attacked. And I don't want to defend Jeff Flake, but I think the attacks are unfair. He's about as conservative of a senator as you could find. And he does have, policies that I support on trade and on opening the borders with Cuba. He was one of the first Republicans to say that this is silly. We should have gotten rid of this Cuba policy decades ago. So, there are occasions.
Signed on to the Gang of Eight.
Yeah, signed on to the Gang of Eight on immigration. So, he occasionally does things like that I think are admirable. But I think what he's done here is he offends some of the people by not supporting President Trump, and I agree with him. So President Trump is astonishingly ignorant, both on policy and on everything, on what an American democracy is. And so I respect Flake for pointing that out. And it needs to be pointed out, and more Republicans need to stand up to him, and we're seeing more evidence of it, particularly in the last week to 10 days.
And Leah, President Trump, as long as we're talking trade, President Trump has called for a renegotiation of NAFTA, and we don't know exactly what that means, I think, as of yet. But how has NAFTA been working for the United States, in your opinion, and what kind of reform should go into any kind of renegotiation?
Well, as a Tucson Hispanic Chamber, we've been very involved in this dialogue. I've traveled to D.C. 4 or 5 times since January just to talk specifically about trade and the NAFTA modernization. The agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is more than 20 years old. In fact, I think it's 23 years old, back before there really was internet and a lot of the service industries that we see engaged in trade. So we support the modernization. The feedback we were providing to federal elected officials and those on staff were that we need to ensure that Arizona industries and businesses were at the table as we talked about very specific industries and different nuances of NAFTA. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the NAFTA objectives as part of the negotiations came out. And it's very thoughtfully put together by the U.S. Trade Representative. I had an opportunity to meet with them for the Western region when I was back in D.C. recently. And the objectives make a lot of sense. Now, it's a negotiation. We've heard those that are negotiating on behalf of Mexico, and it's been recently announced those negotiating on behalf of the United States and I'm sure Canada. So we'll be watching it very closely. Mexico is Arizona's #1 trading partner, bar none. I mean, they are the ones that we are trading with. We are totally dependent on tourism dollars from Mexican nationals. So from an Arizona perspective, this is a very important conversation for us to be following and tracking. What will a border tax or changes in import fees or any kind of those changes make to our industries? Really depends what direction they go. We know our key industries, regarding agriculture and produce and mining and things of that nature, the electrical components, the automotive components that are made in Mexico that are all part of projects that we work on and products we produce here in the U.S. So not only our chamber, but there's coalitions along the border of economic development, educational institutions, and others that are all focused on how do we provide feedback to the U.S. and Mexico as they go through NAFTA negotiations. So very engaged in that dialogue. And in fact, I'm heading to the U.S.-Mexico border conference next week in El Paso to participate in a panel and talk about Arizona's perspective.
Jeff, your thoughts on NAFTA and where it is?
Well, unlike a lot of Democrats, I've never believed that these foreign trade agreements harmed us like a lot of people believe, and like Trump seems to believe. I think NAFTA has been, by and large, good for America and great for Arizona. And sure, being 23 years old, maybe there are parts of it that need to be tweaked. But my concern and my worry is that once we reopen this, who's our president? Trump. I mean, he's the guy who the first thing he did when he came into office was reject the Asian trade pact that had been negotiated over years and years and years and actually had terms that were quite favorable to the United States. And so he basically withdrew us from leadership in that entire region and ceded leadership to China and other countries in that region. So what concerns me most is who our president is, and can he be reined in, or can we prevent him from damaging NAFTA or withdrawing from it entirely because he doesn't get his way in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm more worried from a political perspective. If he'd leave it up to professional people to make these decisions and then join in, I wouldn't be quite so worried. But everything kind of comes back to Donald Trump and what kind of damage he can do to our relationships with allies and trading partners, such as he's already done in many cases.
And I would put it, I share Jeff's concerns. I mean, we've had a concern around the tone of the entire dialogue related to trade with Mexico. So it's something that we're trying to find the right influencers at the federal level. I mean, certainly our congressmen and women and Senators understand the importance, and we work with them closely, but a lot of it's staff. It's Trump administration staff. Who can we influence or talk to make sure that they understand just how important this is to our economy? Governor Ducey certainly gets this. You see him quite often in Mexico. You see him talking about it even recently at the National Governors Association. I mean, I think he's really showing national leadership in terms of how important trade is to the United States. So we need to continue this dialogue, but I am concerned with the tone of how the conversation has gone to this point. And I write a column in El Imparcial, the Mexican newspaper in Sonora, that I'm always trying to reassure Mexican business people how important the relationship is to us, and that we are economically interdependent with one another, and how important it is that we continue business as usual while we go through this political debate.
And how is trade with Mexico? I know SB 1070 certainly did not help that. Have we recovered?
We have. You know, I think one of the biggest points of that is that the National Council La Raza, which is the largest Latino advocacy group that recently changed their name to Unidos USA, but they just hosted their annual conference in Phoenix. And they were leading the boycott against us just 6 years ago. So I went to it. I thanked them for being in Arizona, for spending their dollars. They had 5,000 people at the conference. I mean, just an incredible showing of where we've come and how the tone has changed, I think, in Arizona. The other thing is our state legislators are visiting Mexico. They're engaging with Sonora. We're trying to make sure that that voice is heard and the importance of trade is heard in our state legislature. So it's a different world, I think, in Arizona than it was 5 years ago.
And what about the House of Representatives has put money in for funding a new border wall? Your thoughts on that particular appropriation?
The border wall has just been a crazy dialogue. The idea of any kind of 30-foot physical wall along our Arizona border, when we know it's impassable and that's not very probable, has gotten just everybody very emotional and crazy about it. I think that border security absolutely should be improved. I think we hear that from our sheriffs all entirely along the border, but the use of technology and otherwise would make sense. Our city council, our Pima County, also passed a border wall resolution opposing the idea of a border wall. These national statements that are being made, it's something that we believe that there should be border security, but don't believe that we should all be engaging in perhaps some of our national statements we're making at the local level.
Your thoughts on the wall?
Well, the border has never been more secure than it is now. We've got a lot more Border Patrol and Customs agents than we've ever had in the history of this country. And, you know, I think we saw today when the transcript of President Trump's conversation with Peña Nieto, the president of Mexico, we know what this was about. It was all a charade. He basically admits it in the telephone conversation. Have you read that transcript yet? He basically admits that it was all a charade, and if we build the wall, we'll have to pay for it. But you got to quit. You got to quit telling people Mexico won't pay for it. That's bad for me politically. That's bad for my image. You got to quit doing that. I mean, and the whole tone of the conversation, just as the one with the Australian Prime Minister, is bullying. I mean, he's basically trying to bully the president of Mexico into saying, "Shut up about this wall. I used it to get elected, and now you can shut up about it." I mean, it's really offensive. It's terribly offensive, and I'd invite watchers to go ahead and read the transcript of that. It's unbelievable.
Let's shift gears to a local level. The Ward 3 City Council race, Democratic primary to replace Karen Ulick, who's retiring after 3 terms. There are 3 Democrats in this primary race, and it will be decided at the end of August. And we have Paul Durham, former aide to Nina Trasoff and a corporate attorney, Tom Tronsdale, who's a local business owner, and Felicia Chu, who's a school teacher. And Leah, you were part of a forum with these candidates for the Arizona Daily Star this week. What you walk away with impressions of these candidates? I did.
I think there's pretty marked differences between them. From Felicia, we heard a lot about equity and certainly education. I think she perhaps didn't know the issues as well when we were in the candidate forum, but she talked about outreach to the fire department or the police department, others to gather information. Paul was very detail-oriented. He's a big proponent of solar environmental standards and things of that nature. He's had a lot of history here, being Nina Trasoff's former chief of staff. Tom comes from a small business background growing up in Ward 3, seemed to know his issues, served on the Parks and Rec Commission and the Small Business Commission. So it was interesting to see their various background and their experience, and I think each will bring a very different voice to that seat. My hope is that folks watching your show and others will just realize there is an election. I think that my bigger concern is that people are going to receive their ballots and not even know that we are having an election that's vitally important. Ward 3, the center of our community, so I encourage everybody to vote.
Yeah, we do have generally low turnout primaries in the city of Tucson. We do an all-mail balloting now, so perhaps that will pick it up.
It makes it very easy for people to vote, and I too am very worried about what the turnout's going to be like and how many votes it's going to take to win. Not a lot, I can tell you that from what I've looked at. So, but you know, I'm a little bit prejudiced because Paul was my treasurer when I was chairman of the Democratic Party after Jonathan Rothschild resigned to run for mayor. And so I've known Paul for maybe 12 years and know him quite well. I think we described him earlier as a policy wonk. He's super smart, super careful, super cautious. I think he's probably the leader of the pack, and he's working his tail off in grassroots organizing. So, you know, but I think all of them will do a good job. I don't know much about Mr. Watson, the firefighter, other than seeing him in court one day. He's an independent that the Republicans refused to allow to run as a Republican, which I still don't understand to this day. But seems like a very nice guy and thoughtful. But you know, it's a Democratic city, heavily Democratic, and I think whoever wins the Democratic primary is probably going to have that council seat.
Well, it's certainly probably not a lot of love for Donald Trump within the city of Tucson, which
Certainly
may help the Democratic candidates. There's another prop on the November ballot, the Strong Start Tucson, that will ask voters to raise the sales tax by ½ cent to fund early childhood education efforts. Jeff, what do you think of this one?
Well, the backers of that brought it to the Democratic Party's executive committee to ask for an endorsement of it, and the Democratic Party was very divided and didn't endorse it, and I agree with that decision. I'm just not sure it's within the purview of the city to start taking on education as one of its commitments. I mean, it's not in our charter. You know, we've already passed various bond issues and recently a tax increased for public safety and for roads. I'm just not sure we need to basically be putting more taxes on the backs of hardworking people in Ward 3, in every ward of this city. And so I personally won't be voting for it and wouldn't sign the petitions for it because I just think it's extending the city into an area that the city ought not to be involved in.
Leah, your thoughts on this one?
I'm also concerned. We see a number of tax initiatives that are coming about, and I know when the city of Tucson pushed their proposition that included a sales tax for transportation, the question we asked as a chamber was, how competitive does this make us or not make us as compared to other cities in the surrounding area? But now we're looking at this tax. Potentially, I've heard rumors of a beverage tax, and I know a zoo tax is being talked about. I mean, where do we stop? I'd like to see, for an education perspective, a state approach to this. But perhaps not a tax, but at least some other funding mechanism. And I know there's lots of discussion and debate, which we could do an entire show on that. But I am concerned, and it's not something that our chamber has endorsed.
Right. We've had the state has actually cut back on funding daycare programs for working moms and working families, I should say, which I think is a challenge for if we want to help people get out of poverty. But from what you guys are saying, this is the wrong way of going about making sure that folks have quality daycare.
It's a noble objective, but I don't think this is the right way to do it.
And another proposition would raise the sales tax. You just mentioned it, Leah, 1/10 of a cent to help out the zoo. It's called the Reed Park Zoo Animal Quality of Life Implementation Act. Your thoughts on this one?
I mean, I love the zoo. I think that's a wonderful avenue in which we should invest dollars, but I don't, again, sales tax, I mean, where do we stop? Why isn't the Desert Museum having a sales tax? What about Old Tucson? I mean, I don't think this is the direction that perhaps we should be going in terms of increasing the sales tax, specifically for the zoo. Perhaps there's another way to fund, and I don't know what the research has been done in terms of other alternative funding models.
All right, Jeff, you get the last word on this one. We have to wrap up.
Love the zoo, but I can't support another tax.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That is our show for today. My thanks to my guests, Jeff Rogers and Leah Marquez-Peterson, for this conversation. Also, my thanks to our media partners at Tucson Weekly, Tucson Local Media, Creative Tucson, and Community Radio KXCI 91.3 FM, where you can hear a radio version of Zona Politics at 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. If you missed any part of today's show, you can find all our episodes at zonapolitics.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook. I'm Jim Nitzel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Zona Politics is hosted by Tucson Weekly senior writer Jim Nitzel. The program is produced by Jennifer Powers Murphy and Danny Vinnick and edited by Jim Rundle. Special thanks to KXCI, Tucson Weekly, Brink Creative Digital, and all supporters who provide crucial funding for the program. Learn more about Zona Politics at zonapolitics.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter